watching East Tennessee's first and only year-round sports talk show on television. This is The Sports Source with your host, John Pennington.
Good Sunday morning and welcome into The Sports Source. Always good to have our friend Mike Stoll in town. Always good to hit him with snowballs. You know, you can debate our aim, but anyway. Packed house today. Tons of former Vols are going to be with us, VFLs, whatever you want to call them. We got a lot of those guys, and we're going to be previewing the Tennessee-Iowa game coming up on Friday. This first segment of our show, as always, brought to you by the folks at Phil Cobble, Fine Homes and Land. And when it comes to real estate in Blount, Loudoun, and Knox counties, your first move should be to call Phil Cobble and his team or to visit philcobblehomes.com. They represent beautiful homes in every price range. Take a look at this incredible home in West Knox County. Absolutely beautiful. And if you're looking to sell rather than buy, you also need to get in touch with the Cobble team. Phil Cobble, Fine Homes and Land. All right. Mentioned that we're doing a bowl preview. Let's go ahead and show you what our show looks like today. Iowa overview. For those of you who haven't done any research on Iowa, we're going to give you kind of a thumbnail sketch. We'll talk about Tennessee-Iowa bowl matchups, some areas where you might find an advantage for one team or the other, and then look at this group of VFLs. Daniel Hood, Fuad Reveiz, Mike Stoll, J.J. Surlis, Chris Wampler, Dewey Warren. Very happy to have all those guys in the house, and happy to have much of my regular crew back here in the house. We are joined by Bob Hodge, who, of course, is a freelance contributor to the Knoxville News-Sentinel.
Good morning.
We have Mike Stoll right there. Always good to have Mike back in town. We have Mike Strange from the Knoxville News-Sentinel and Chuck Cavaleris from Tennessee Golf Central.
And numerous other players.
Almost went back in time there. And, of course, I didn't mention, but Mike Stoll, 88 to 92 Tennessee offensive lineman.
Yep.
All right. Gentlemen, let's quickly talk about Tennessee and Iowa. We'll get into some comparisons and some numbers a little bit later. Tennessee enters the game with a banged-up receiving core. They will have Matt Crowder back, it looks like, which you saw those last two games without Matt Crowder in there at center. The offensive line kind of reverted to that early season form. I'm sure you enjoyed watching that, Mike. Thoughts on Tennessee going into this game with Iowa? Just your first keys to this game, in your opinion, for the Volunteers?
Defense, defense, defense. I think Tennessee's offense is banged up. Their offensive line hadn't been that good. So Tennessee's got to play good defense, and they haven't been as good since A.J. Johnson hadn't been with the team. So I think defense first is what I think is the big key for Tennessee.
I really want to see Tennessee do well on first down production. You want to put yourself in a short down and distance. So be able to run the ball well in first down. You've got Hurd back in. You've got an offensive line. Iowa's defensive front, they have a couple of second-team all Big Ten players. So can you run the football and not put yourself, because you don't have those receivers, in a bad situation?
I want to see Tennessee's receivers get open. That's such a big help to Joshua Dobbs, and his passing has been a little bit inconsistent at times. I don't think Tennessee's receivers have always done a good job of getting separation. And banged up as they are, some good guys are going to be in there. I think that's a big key for this game.
And to me, it's clear the strongest point on Iowa's team is and Mike touched on it, is the defensive line. I mean, you got two NFL prospects at tackle. Look what Missouri did against Tennessee here. I think it's a very similar personnel with what Iowa has, and that's their strength against your weakness.
Say the S word.
Sack. Which is the reason defense is going to be the most important thing.
Well, one thing that's interesting is you look at Iowa and they don't have a ton of sacks rolled up on the season. But part of that is they play in a Big Ten where most teams run the ball first. So that impacts it. But also, as Chuck said, you've got two defensive tackles there who, even if they didn't have roll up big sack numbers against some of those other teams, we've seen that Tennessee's line isn't as good as a lot of other teams. So in reading some of the Iowa papers this week, a lot of folks were pointing to that matchup and saying these seniors at defensive tackle are going to be licking their chops for this Tennessee team. The closer we get to the game, I think when we first looked at it, we said, okay, could have played West Virginia. Oh, that'd be a nightmare in terms of their offense. Could have played Notre Dame, which would have been appealing. But we immediately thought, okay, Iowa, Big Ten, slow. Now we're getting closer to the game. You've done a little more research on Iowa. Still feeling good about this matchup for Tennessee-Iowa?
Not as good.
I
Not as good. I mean, Tennessee is still a slight favorite, like 3.5 points, which to me is a little bit surprising, but not quite as good as we were going into it. It's just been a very inconsistent offensive team for Iowa. They could have won their division, and then they really faded down the stretch. Yep. And I think another big key, John, too, is the mental approach. Because Tennessee played better down the stretch, but how is this going to carry over to the bowl game? I mean, is Tennessee just happy to be there because it was such a big goal?
I think Iowa has a little bit of a negative carryover to the bowl game because just a few weeks to go in the season, people were talking about them winning their division. And I think you've seen it in the past with some Tennessee teams when you went to a lesser bowl game than what you were hoping for. So I think Tennessee has a little bit of a mental edge from that standpoint. They're just happy to be anywhere.
And from a fan perspective, Tennessee mowed through their ticket allotment very quickly. Iowa still has only sold about half of their 8,000 seats. So they're not going to have a big crowd down there, which I think tells you that. And you've also seen some quotes this week from Kirk Ferentz saying, well, at some programs, 7-5 is acceptable. At Iowa, it's not. So it's interesting. What do you think, Mike, on this matchup?
I think it could be interesting. Tennessee did have some momentum going in. Iowa, everybody pointed to them to win their division and win their side of the conference, and they didn't. They really fell down pretty bad. So you think that they're not carrying the momentum into that. Tennessee, though, although they played well down the stretch, they were spotty at times. And you see what happens when they didn't have a run game against Vanderbilt. They've got banged up receivers. Joshua Dobbs reverted a little bit in the last 2 games against Missouri and Vanderbilt. So is he able to collect everything? Is that offensive line going to be able to do the things and pick up the stunts like Missouri showed them vulnerable to? And if they can do that, I think they have a good chance. But it's Tennessee has some momentum. I think Iowa doesn't have the fan support. I think Tennessee's excited to be there.
Let me show everyone here just some thumbnail stuff on Iowa. This is how their season started. They finished 7-5 overall, 4-4 in the Big Ten, as we discussed. But they started out with just 1 loss in their first 6 games. They're 5-1. They're ranked in the top 20. Knocked off. They've played 10 teams that were Power 5 conferences. Tennessee, of course, only played 9 this year. Then you look at the back half of their schedule. Lost to Maryland, lost to Minnesota. The 2 losses at the end of the season, a tight loss to Wisconsin, and then that overtime. They had a big 24-7 lead in that game against Nebraska and lost it and wound up losing the game in overtime. For a comparison, just to step back through Tennessee, you see I don't know how many of you have done this and looked at the records of Tennessee's opponents, but you see there, everybody in that first half of the season had a winning record this year. So you have the 3 losses to Oklahoma, Georgia, and Florida, but they won 23 games combined. You look at the next part of the schedule, and there's where you see some improvement. 3-3 down the stretch, won 3 of their last 4, of course. Missouri, 10-3 team, comes and beats you 29-21 in a close game. Vanderbilt a little too close for comfort. You might be wondering about Iowa in bowl history. As we said, we kind of all chuckle when SEC plays Big Ten, but Kirk Ferentz has been at Iowa since 1999. I think he's in his 16th year, 15th year. Been to a lot of bowl games down there. They are 6-5 under Ferentz, and you can see they've beaten Florida. They beat LSU in Nick Saban's final game at LSU. Beat South Carolina. Lost their last 2 bowl games to Oklahoma and LSU. So this isn't a team that necessarily buries its head and hides when it goes up against top competition or SEC competition. And then the last thing I want to show, of course, Tennessee's played Iowa twice before. In 1982 in the Peach Bowl, it was a bitter cold day down on New Year's Eve in Atlanta. Iowa won that game 28-22. Tennessee had a chance to win it inside the 10-yard line. The final minute of the game, and Alan Cockrell got stuffed on a 4th down play. 1987, the Kickoff Classic. Tennessee wins in East Rutherford, New Jersey, 23-22. Both teams went on to win 10 games. The Darren Miller fumble, 96 yards, the famous John Ward call of Darren Miller running through New Jersey. That was that game, and also a pair of late field goals won that game for Tennessee. As we go through today's show, we are going to have a lot more information on the bowl game. But we told you about these VFLs that we brought in. Coming up, we're going to start rotating these guys through. Dewey Warren, Fuad Reveiz join Mike Stoll. We're going to talk about the overall state of the program. We had some of these guys on before the season to talk about where things were going. Tennessee goes 6-6. They're headed to a bowl. Where do things stand now? We'll talk about that and much more on the bowl to come. Come on back on the Sports Source.
Like our set? Turn to Benedict Construction.